My Best Friends Live in the Woods. The Adventures of Albert by Anne Michelle Moracek. Chapter 11. Smells Like Home. Some days just seem brighter than others. Smells are stronger. Images seem to imprint themselves in your memory, like snapshots of life that take on their own glow. Laughter rings like angel bells, and the stars themselves sparkle in the eyes of the ones you love. It's as if time stands still and steps aside as an observer. That's how Albert remembered the time they brought the pine tree home. It all started one night over his evening cup of chamomile tea. "What's wrong tonight, dear?" Mother Skunk asked a gloomy Albert. "I had a dream last night that I just can't shake off," Albert explained. "And now that it's getting to be night, I just keep thinking about it." "A good dream, I hope," Mother said as she stopped her busy work in the kitchen and came to sit down next to Albert at the kitchen table. She carried the teapot and refilled his mug. "Looks like tonight is a 2-cup evening," she smiled. "Do you ever smell something and it transports you back in time to a memory of another time and place?" Albert asked Mother, scanning her face. "I suppose," she said, pouring herself a cup. "Well, remember the longest night celebration?" Albert asked. "Yes, of course," Mother replied. "Well, ever since I smelled the pine spiral and walked along the pine and was surrounded by its fragrance, I've been trying to remember why it seems so familiar. Then, last night, I dreamed I was a baby back in the hollow of the fir tree, and the other pine trees were all pushed in close around us, and it smelled like home." Tears welled up in Albert's eyes. "Oh, my darling boy!" Mother Skunk reached out and held his hands. She sat very still and took a long, slow breath. Then another, and closed her eyes. Then she clapped her hands with a smile and jumped up. "I have an idea, a splendid, fun idea. But we will need Mr. Beaver's help." "Really?" Albert was surprised at her sudden jolly mood. "What is it?" he asked wide-eyed. "We will bring a small pine tree into the cave and set it up just there." She pointed to the right of the fireplace hearth. "And when the steam rises from the teapot, it will drift over the pine and make the whole cave smell just like being in the trees." She clapped at the happy thought. "Oh, that sounds wonderful," Albert clapped. "It's too dark to venture down to Mr. Beaver's pond tonight, but we can make the trip at dawn. Now off to bed with you," she smiled. As Albert lay on the great moss bed surrounded by his siblings, he had trouble sleeping, but this time from excited anticipation. When he finally drifted off, the dream returned, and he was once again in the hollow of the old fir tree. But this time, he was smiling. Just as Mother had promised, she and Albert made the trip down to Mr. Beaver's pond at first light. Mr. and Mrs. Beaver were on the bank having their breakfast of marsh weeds and tree bark. "What brings you out this early?" Mrs. Beaver greeted them. "Oh, good morning," Mother called. "I need a favor." She explained Albert's dreams as the beavers munched and nodded. "Well, I suppose you want me to cut down this prize pine tree for you and drag it all the way into your cave." He looked at her and raised an eyebrow. Suddenly embarrassed at the imposition, Mother Skunk stammered a bit. Well, yes, it seemed like a good idea last night." She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "Of course, it's a wonderful idea." Mrs. Beaver shot a sideways glance at Mr. Beaver. "We would be happy to help if that would make Albert feel more at home. Wouldn't we, dear?" she said, staring at Mr. Beaver. "There would be a batch of gingerbread cookies in it for you," Mother Skunk added hopefully. Mrs. Beaver and Mother Skunk exchanged smiles. "Well then, let's go find you a tree." Mr. Beaver stood up. "And we're off," Mrs. Beaver laughed. As they started through the forest to find their prize tree, Mrs. Beaver whispered to Mother Skunk, "The way to a man's heart is always through his stomach." She winked. There was really no shortage of pine trees, but most were towering tall. Too tall really to bend your neck back and see the tops. "How about this one?" Mr. Beaver pointed. "Oh, now you're just showing off," Mrs. Beaver laughed. It was enormous. "Remember, it has to fit through the cave door and stand by the fireplace," reminded Mother Skunk. At last they spotted a small seedling pine growing along the edge of the great glen where the sunlight was brighter. "How about this one?" Mr. Beaver asked. "I've been needing to clear the glen edges anyway. Have to keep them from encroaching on the glen. It needs to stay open for the longest night ceremony." He eyed the edges of the glen critically. "Perfect," the ladies clapped. "Okay, down she goes," Mr. Beaver said. "Stand back." And in short work he had the tree down, and they all chattered merrily as they dragged the pine tree back to the cave. Mrs. Rabbit and her twins heard the merry parade and joined in. "We're taking a pine tree back to the cave so it smells like home," Albert explained happily. "Oh, sounds like fun," the bunnies hopped about. "Come along then," Mother Skunk invited. So they joined in the procession. Just a few more paces, and who should be there but Jimmy Squirrel, his mother, and his 3 baby sisters. "We're taking a pine tree back to the cave so it smells like home," Albert told the squirrels. "Well, can we come?" Jimmy flicked his tail excitedly. "Oh, Jimmy, it's not polite to invite yourself," Mother Squirrel scolded. But she looked with a shy grin at Mother Skunk. "Of course, join in, come along," Mother Skunk grinned. Mrs. Squirrel's look of embarrassment snapped instantly into a broad smile. Not waiting to be invited twice, she and the girls stepped in line by Mrs. Beaver. And Albert and Jimmy raced ahead a short way and then raced back, too excited to go the slower pace of the adults. They made such a merry little parade to the cave entrance. It took some pushing and moving of kitchen tables to make a path, but the tree was tugged and pulled to the spot Mother Skunk had pointed. When Mr. Beaver tried to stand it up, the top third hit the ceiling and bent, but it would not go up. "It's too tall, oh dear," Mrs. Beaver sighed. "All that work for nothing," she moaned. No, I have an idea," Mother Skunk stepped up. Mother always had a can-do attitude. "We'll make it work," she said. "Mr. Beaver, if you lay it back down for just a bit, could you chop off the top third of the tree?" "Well, sure," he said, and he did. "Now it should stand up." Mother put both hands on her hips, eyeing it critically. Sure enough, this time it went right up. Everyone cheered and hugged each other. "Now we can snap each little branch off the top into separate pieces and make a wreath for the front door." She put Bluebell in charge of the wreath making, with some twine to tie it in place. In the meantime, Mother Skunk excused herself into the kitchen. "You all enjoy the fire, the lovely pine. Bluebell, start a pot of tea, please, dear." Before long, the enchanted smell of gingerbread cookies was drifting out and mixing with the scent of the pine. "Now this really does smell like home," Albert smiled a warm, contented smile. Shortly, Mother Skunk appeared carrying a huge tray of gingerbread cookies. She had made a triple batch. All of her children and their dear friends sat and warmed themselves by the fire. They ate the cookies and sipped the tea and talked and laughed for such a long time that when Molly looked outside, it was dark, and a heavy snowfall had already blanketed the forest in several inches of white. "Mother, look!" Molly pointed out the window. They all stared in stunned silence. The crescent moon was enough to light the forest with the reflected light of a now heavy snowfall. "Oh, no! How will I ever get the twins home?" Mrs. Rabbit began to hop a worried hop of anxiety. "You won't," Mother Skunk said. "Sue, you will just have to stay. How delightful! We will all stay up past our bedtimes and keep the party going. And when we are tired, we will rest by the fire and sleep on my extra mats. I have knit blankets. You are all welcome to stay." She clapped. "Oh my, are you sure?" Mrs. Beaver asked. "Quite sure," Mother Skunk insisted. It was a party to remember, and when they finally got out the mats and blankets, everyone was in such a jolly mood. The next day, the sun rose pink on the blanket of snow outside. Mother Skunk tiptoed over to Albert and Bluebell, waking them up gently. "Dears, could you help me think of something to feed all our guests for breakfast?" She was a bit anxious, wringing her hands. "I'm used to feeding a big family, but this many more, well, I don't know." She looked at them for help. When Albert was hungry, his tummy always reminded him of the pantry, but they had eaten all the gingerbread cookies last night, and that was always his go-to. His eyes scanned the kitchen and then landed on a few spilled kernels of corn. He suddenly remembered seeing them before, but now he noticed that they actually made a little trail into the pantry. The spilled kernels led way in the back of the first shelf. "Mother, we could have corn porridge for breakfast," he offered. "The back string is pulled open a bit," he observed. Mother came over to the pantry to stare in over Albert's shoulder. "I forgot this was back there," she mused as she pulled it out. "Perfect," she brightened. "Good job, Albert. Did you pull open the bag string?" she asked. "No, ma'am." He shook his head.
I remember you, darling mine. Come to me in my dreams. Transport me to you, scent of pine from so long ago. I remember you, darling mine. Come to me in my dreams. Transport me to you, scent of pine. Your memory fills my mind. Somehow the scent of pine is there. Everywhere fills the air. I remember you, darling mine. transport me to you, scent of pine.
Chapter 11. Smells Like Home. Discussion and questions. Memories. We remember our lives in snapshots of images and emotions. Most fade with time, but there are a few that remain bright, and we hold those as treasures in our hearts. Often, smells act as triggers to fire the memories they are associated with. Question 1. Do you have treasured memories that are associated with a smell? Perhaps baking bread or cinnamon? Mother Skunk shows a deep compassion for Albert. She is kind and understanding when he expresses a homesickness for his first family in the trees. She could have become angry and jealous at his longing for his first family, but instead she tries to comfort and support Albert. Question 2. How did her evening talks with Albert help Mother Skunk to understand him? Question 3. How does a deeper understanding open the door to compassion and creative solutions? When the snow falls that evening, Mother Skunk turned a difficult situation into a wonderful, fun evening. Question 4. How did Mother Skunk show her compassion for her friends after the snow fell? Question 5. Are there situations in your life where a deeper understanding of and compassion for others could inspire a creative solution? I am the composer and performer for all the music in this video. Both audio recordings and the printed scores are available on mybestfriendsliveinthe.woods.com. I will provide the link below. The painted illustrations are also my creation. Prints are available on mybestfriendsliveinthe.woods.com. This is a novel. The chapters are meant to be heard in the order in which they were written. And while each chapter can stand alone, they do build as new characters are introduced and past events are referred to. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. The chapters are numbered, so if you're just joining us, be sure to go back and watch from Chapter 1